Makes voyage with the murderer. The man in the broom suit. What he is really like. The main facts were, of course, cabled to the South African papers, but I only read my own lengthy articles at a much later date. I received approval and full instructions by cable at Bulawayo. I was on the staff of the Daily Budget, and I had a private word of congratulation from Lord Nasby himself. I was definitely accredited to hunt down the murderer, and I, and only I, knew that the murderer was not Harry Rayburn. But let the world think that it was he best so for the present. Chapter XXIV. We arrived at Bulawayo early on Saturday morning. I was disappointed in the place. It was very hot, and I hated the hotel. Also Sir Eustace was what I can only describe as thoroughly sulky. I think it was all our wooden animals that annoyed him, especially the big giraffe. It was a colossal giraffe with an impossible neck, a mild eye and a dejected tail. It had character. It had charm. A controversy was already arising as to whom it belonged, me or Suzanne. We had each contributed a tiki to its purchase. Suzanne advanced the claims of seniority and the married state. I stuck to the position that I had been the first to behold its beauty. In the meantime, I must admit, it occupied a good deal of this three-dimensional space of ours. To carry 49 wooden animals, all of awkward shape, and all of extremely brittle wood, is somewhat of a problem. 2 porters were laden with a bunch of animals each, and one promptly dropped a ravishing group of ostriches and broke their heads off. Warned by this, Suzanne and I carried all we could. Colonel Race helped, and I pressed the big giraffe into Sir Eustace's arms. Even the correct Miss Pettigrew did not escape. A large hippopotamus and 2 black warriors fell to her share. I had a feeling Miss Pettigrew didn't like me. Perhaps she fancied I was a bold hussy. Anyway, she avoided me as much as she could. And the funny thing was, her face seemed vaguely familiar to me, though I couldn't quite place it. We reposed ourselves most of the morning, and in the afternoon we drove out to the Matapos to see Rhodes's grave. That is to say, we were to have done so, but at the last moment Sir Eustace backed out. He was very nearly in as bad a temper as the morning we arrived at Cape Town, when he bounced the peaches on the floor and they squashed. Evidently arriving early in the morning at places is bad for his temperament. He cursed the porters, he cursed the waiters at breakfast, he cursed the whole hotel management. He would doubtless have liked to curse Miss Pettigrew, who hovered around with her pencil and pad, but I don't think even Sir Eustace would have dared to curse Miss Pettigrew. She's just like the efficient secretary in a book. I only rescued our dear giraffe just in time. I feel Sir Eustace would have liked to dash him to the ground. To return to our expedition, after Sir Eustace had backed out, Miss Pettigrew said she would remain at home in case he might want her. And at the very last minute Suzanne sent down a message to say she had a headache. So Colonel Race and I drove off alone. He is a strange man. One doesn't notice it so much in a crowd. But, when one is alone with him, the sense of his personality seems really almost overpowering. He becomes more taciturn, and yet his silence seems to say more than speech might do. It was so that day that we drove to the Matapos through the soft yellow-brown scrub. Everything seemed strangely silent except our car, which I should think was the first Ford ever made by man. The upholstery of it was torn to ribbons and, though I know nothing about engines, even I could guess that all was not as it should be in its interior. By and by the character of the country changed. Great boulders appeared, piled up into fantastic shapes. I felt suddenly that I had got into a primitive era. Just for a moment Neanderthal men seemed quite as real to me as they had to Papa. I turned to Colonel Race. "There must have been giants once," I said dreamily. "And their children were just like children are today. They played with handfuls of pebbles, piling them up and knocking them clove, and the more cleverly they balanced them, the better pleased they were. If I were to give a name to this place I should call it, the country of giant children." "Perhaps you're nearer the mark than you know," said Colonel Race gravely. "Simple, primitive, big, that is Africa." I nodded appreciatively. "You love it, don't you?" I asked. "Yes. But to live in it long, well, it makes one what you would call cruel. One comes to hold life and death very lightly." "Yes," I said, thinking of Harry Rayburn. He had been like that too. But not cruel to weak things. Opinions differ as to what are and are not weak things, Miss Anne. There was a note of seriousness in his voice which almost startled me. I felt that I knew very little really of this man at my side. I meant children and dogs, I think. I can truthfully say I've never been cruel to children or dogs. So you don't class women as weak things? I considered. No, I don't think I do, though they are, I suppose. That is, they are nowadays. But Papa always said that in the beginning men and women roamed the world together, equal in strength like lions and tigers and giraffes, interpolated Colonel Race slyly. I laughed. Everyone makes fun of that giraffe. And giraffes. They were nomadic, you see. It wasn't till they settled down in communities, and women did one kind of thing and men another, that women got weak. And of course, underneath, one is still the same, one feels the same, I mean, and that is why women worship physical strength in men. It's what they once had and have lost. Almost ancestor worship, in fact. Something of the kind. And you really think that's true? That women worship strength, I mean. I think it's quite true if one's honest. You think you admire moral qualities, but when you fall in love, you revert to the primitive where the physical is all that counts. But I don't think that's the end. If you lived in primitive conditions it would be all right, but you don't, and so, in the end, the other thing wins after all. It's the things that are apparently conquered that always do win, isn't it? They win in the only way that counts. Like what the Bible says about losing your soul and finding it. In the end, said Colonel Race thoughtfully, you fall in love and you fall out of it. Is that what you mean? Not exactly, but you can put it that way if you like. But I don't think you've ever fallen out of love, Miss Anne. No, I haven't, I admitted frankly. Or fallen in love, either. I did not answer. The car drew up at our destination and brought the conversation to a close. We got out and began the slow ascent to the world's villa. Not for the first time, I felt a slight discomfort in Colonel Race's company. He veiled his thoughts so well behind those impenetrable black eyes. He frightened me a little. He had always frightened me. I never knew where I stood with him. We climbed in silence till we reached the spot where Rhodes lies guarded by giant boulders. A strange eerie place, far from the haunts of men, that sings a ceaseless paean of rugged beauty. We sat there for some time in silence. Then descended once more, but diverging slightly from the path. Sometimes it was a rough scramble and once we came to a sharp slope or rock that was almost sheer. Colonel Race went first, then turned to help me. Better lift you, he said suddenly, and slung me off my feet with a quick gesture. I felt the strength of him as he set me down and released his clasp. A man of iron, with muscles like taut steel. And again, I felt afraid, especially as he did not move aside, but stood directly in front of me, staring into my face. What are you really doing here, Anne Bedingfeld? He said abruptly. I'm a gypsy seeing the world. Yes, that's true enough. The newspaper correspondent is only a pretext. You've not the soul of the journalist. You're out for your own hand snatching at life. But that's not all. What was he going to make me tell him? I is afraid. I looked him full in the face. My eyes can't keep secrets like his, but they can carry the war into the enemy's country. What are you really doing here, Colonel Race? I asked deliberately. For a moment I thought he wasn't going to answer. He was clearly taken aback, though. At last he spoke, and his words seemed to afford him a grim amusement. Pursuing ambition, he said. Just that, pursuing ambition. You will remember, Miss Bedingfeld, that, by that sin fell the angels, etc. They say, I said slowly, that you are really connected with the government, that you are in the Secret Service. Is that true? Was it my fancy, or did he hesitate for a fraction of a second before he answered? I can assure you, Miss Bedingfeld, that I am out here strictly as a private individual traveling for my pleasure. Thinking the answer over later, it struck me as slightly ambiguous. Perhaps he meant it to be so. We rejoined the car in silence. Halfway back to Bulawayo we stopped for tea at a somewhat primitive structure at the side of the road. The proprietor was digging in the garden and seemed annoyed at being disturbed. But he graciously promised to see what he could do. After an interminable wait he brought us some stale cakes and some lukewarm tea. Then he disappeared to his garden again. No sooner had he departed than we were surrounded by cats. 6 of them all meowing piteously at once. The racket was deafening. I offered them some pieces of cake. They devoured them ravenously. I poured all the milk there was into a saucer and they fought each other to get it. Oh, I cried indignantly, they're starved. It's wicked. Please, please, order some more milk and another plate of cake. Colonel Race departed silently to do my bidding. The cats had begun meowing again. He returned with a big jug of milk and the cats finished it all. I got up with determination on my face. I'm going to take those cats home with us, I shan't leave them here. My dear child, don't be absurd. You can't carry 6 cats as well as 50 wooden animals round with you. Never mind the wooden animals. These cats are alive. I shall take them back with me. You will do nothing of the kind. I looked at him resentfully, but he went on, you think me cruel, but one can't go through life sentimentalizing over these things. It's no good standing out, I shan't allow you to take them. It's a primitive country, you know, and I'm stronger than you. I always know when I am beaten. I went down to the car with tears in my eyes. They're probably short of food just today, he explained consolingly. That man's wife has gone into Bulawayo for stores. So it will be all right. And anyway, you know, the world's full of starving cats. Don't, I said fiercely. I'm teaching you to realize life as it is. I'm teaching you to be hard and ruthless like I am. That's the secret of strength and the secret of success. I'd sooner be dead than hard, I said passionately. We got into the car and started off. I pulled myself together again slowly. Suddenly, to my intense astonishment, he took my hand in his. Anne, he said gently, I want you. Will you marry me? I was utterly taken aback. Oh, no, I stammered. I can't. Why not? I don't care for you in that way. I've never thought of you like that. I see. Is that the only reason? I had to be honest. I owed it him. No, I said, it is not. You see, I care for someone else. I see, he said again. And was that true at the beginning when I first saw you on the Kilmorden? No, I whispered. It was since then. I see, he said for the 3rd time, but this time there was a purposeful ring in his voice that made me turn and look at him. His face was grimmer than I had ever seen it. What do you mean? I faltered. He looked at me, inscrutable, dominating. Only that I know now what I have to do. His words sent a shiver through me. There was a determination behind them that I did not understand and it frightened me. We neither of us said any more until we got back to the hotel. I went straight up to Suzanne. She was lying on her bed reading, and did not look in the least as though she had a headache. Here reposes the perfect gooseberry, she remarked. We as the tactful chaperone. Why, Anne dear, what's the matter? For I had burst into a flood of tears. I told her about the cats. I felt it wasn't fair to tell her about Colonel Race. But Suzanne is very sharp. I think she saw that there was something more behind. You haven't caught a chill, have you, Anne? Sounds absurd even to suggest such things in this heat, but you keep on shivering. It's nothing, I said. Nerves or someone walking over my grave. I keep feeling something dreadful's going to happen. Don't be silly, said Suzanne, with decision. Let's talk of something interesting. Anne, about those diamonds, what about them? I'm not sure they're safe with me. It was all right before, no one could think they'd be amongst my things. But now that everyone knows we're such friends, you and I'll be under suspicion too. Nobody knows they're in a roll of films, though, I argued. It's a splendid hiding place and I really don't think we could better it. She agreed doubtfully, but said we would discuss it again when we got to the falls. Our train went at 9 o'clock. Sir Eustace's temper was still far from good, and Miss Pettigrew looked subdued. Colonel Race was completely himself. I felt that I had dreamed the whole conversation on the way back. I slept heavily that night on my hard bunk, struggling with ill-defined, menacing dreams. I awoke with a headache and went out on the observation platform of the car. It is fresh and lovely, and everywhere, as far as one could see, were the undulating wooded hills. I loved it more than any place I had ever seen. I wished then that I could have a little hut somewhere in the heart of the scrub and live there always. Just before 2:30, Colonel Race called me out from the office and pointed to a bouquet-shaped white mist that hovered over one portion of the bush. "The spray from the falls," he said. "We are nearly there." I was still umped in that strange dream feeling of exaltation that had succeeded my troubled night. Very strongly implanted in me was the feeling that I had come home. Home. And yet I had never been here before, or had I in dreams. We walked from the train to the hotel, a big white building closely wired against mosquitoes. There were no roads, no houses. We went out on the stoop and I uttered a gasp. There, half a mile away, facing us, were the falls. "I've never seen anything so grand and beautiful, I never shall." "Anne, you're fey," said Suzanne, as we sat down to lunch. "I've never seen you like this before." She stared at me curiously. "Am I?" I laughed, but I felt that my laugh was unnatural. "It's just that I love it all. It's more than that." A little frown creased her brow, one of apprehension. Yes, I was happy, but beyond that I had the curious feeling that I was waiting for something that would happen soon. I was excited, restless. After tea we strolled out, got on the trolley and were pushed by smiling blacks down the little tracks of rails to the bridge. It was a marvelous sight, the great chasm and the rushing waters below, and the veil of mist and spray in front of us that parted every now and then for one brief minute to show the cataract of water and then closed up again in its impenetrable mystery. That, to my mind, has always been the fascination of the falls, their elusive quality. You always think you are going to see and you never do. We crossed the bridge and walked slowly on by the path that was marked out with white stone on either side and led round the brink of the gorge. Finally we arrived in a big clearing where on the left a path led downwards towards the chasm. "The Palm Gully," explained Colonel Race. "Shall we go down? Or shall we leave it until tomorrow? It will take some time, and it's a good climb up again." "We'll leave it until tomorrow," said Sir Eustace with decision. He isn't at all fond of strenuous physical exercise, I have noticed. He led the pack. As we went, we passed a fine native stalking along. Behind him came a woman who seemed to have the entire household belongings piled upon her head. The collection included a frying pan. "I never have my camera when I want it," groaned Suzanne. "That's an opportunity that will occur often enough, Mrs. Blair," said Colonel Race. "So don't lament." We arrived back on the bridge. "Shall we go into the rainbow forest?" he continued. "Or are you afraid of getting wet?" Suzanne and I accompanied him. Sir Eustace went back to the hotel. I was rather disappointed in the rainbow forest. There weren't nearly enough rainbows, and we got soaked to the skin, but every now and then we got a glimpse of the falls opposite and realized how enormously wide they are. Oh, dear, dear falls, how I love and worship you and always shall. We got back to the hotel just in time to change for dinner. Sir Eustace seems to have taken a positive antipathy to Colonel Race. Suzanne and I rallied him gently, but didn't get much satisfaction. After dinner, he retired to his sitting room, dragging Miss Pettigrew with him. Suzanne and I talked for a while with Colonel Race, and then she declared, with an immense euphemism, that she was going to bed. I didn't want to be left alone with him, so I got up too and went to my room. But I was far too excited to go to sleep. I did not even undress. I lay back in a chair and gave myself up to dreaming. And all the time I was conscious of something coming nearer and nearer. There was a knock at the door and I started. I got up and went to it. A little black boy held out a note. It was addressed to me in a handwriting I did not know. I took it and came back into the room. I stood there holding it. At last I opened it. It was very short. I must see you. I dare not come to the hotel. Will you come to the clearing by the Palm Gully? In memory of cabin 17, please come. The man you knew as Harry Rayburn. My heart beat to suffocation. He was here then. Oh, I had known it all along. I had felt him near me. All unwittingly I had come to his place of retreat. I wound a scarf round my head and stole to the door. I must be careful. He was hunted down. No one must see me meet him. I stole along to Suzanne's room. She was fast asleep. I could hear her breathing evenly. Sir Eustace? I paused outside the door of his sitting room. Yes, he was dictating to Miss Pettigrew. I could hear her monotonous voice repeating. I therefore venture to suggest that in tackling this problem of colored labor she paused for him to continue, and I heard him grunt something angrily. I stole on again. Colonel Race's room was empty. I did not see him in the lounge. And he was the man I feared most. Still, I could waste no more time. I slipped quickly out of the hotel and took the path to the bridge. I crossed it and stood there waiting in the shadow. If anyone had followed me, I should see them crossing the bridge. But the minutes passed, and no one came. I had not been followed. I turned and took the path to the clearing. I took 6 paces or so and then stopped. Something had rustled behind me. It could not be anyone though had followed me from the hotel. It was someone who was already here, waiting. And immediately, without rhyme or reason, but with the sureness of instinct, I knew that it, as I myself who, as threatened. It was the same feeling as I had had on the Kilmorden that night, a sure instinct warning me of danger. I looked sharply over my shoulder. Silence. I moved on a pace or two. Again I heard that rustle. Still walking, I looked over my shoulder again. A man's figure came out of the shadow. He saw that I saw him, and jumped forward, hard on my track. It was too dark to recognize anybody. All I could see was that he was tall, and a European, not a native. I took to my heels and ran. I heard him pounding behind. I ran quicker, keeping my eyes fixed on the height stones that showed me where to step, for there was no moon that night. And suddenly my foot felt nothingness. I heard the man behind me laugh, an evil, sinister laugh. It rang in my ears, as I fell headlong clown down to destruction far beneath. Chapter XXV. I came to myself slowly and painfully. I was conscious of an aching head and a shooting pain down my left arm when I tried to move, and everything seemed dreamlike and unreal. Nightmare visions floated before me. I felt myself falling again. Once Harry Rayburn's face seemed to come to me out of the mist. Almost I imagined it real. Then it floated away again, mocking me. Once, I remember, someone put a cup to my lips and I drank. A black face grinned into mine, a devil's face, I thought it, and screamed out. Then dreams again, long troubled dreams in which I vainly sought Harry Rayburn to warn him what of? I did not know myself. But there was some danger, some great danger, and I alone could save him. Then darkness again, merciful darkness, and real sleep. I woke at last myself again. The long nightmare was over. I remembered perfectly everything that had happened, my hurried flight from the hotel to meet Harry, the man in the shadows, and that last terrible moment of falling. By some miracle or other I had not been killed. I was bruised and aching and very weak, but I was alive. But where was I? Moving my head with difficulty, I looked round me. I was in a small room with rough wooden walls. On them were hung skins of animals and various tusks of ivory. I was lying on a kind of rough couch, also covered with skins, and my left arm was bandaged up and felt stiff and uncomfortable. At first I thought I was alone, and then I saw a man's figure sitting between me and the light, his head turned toward the window. He was so still that he might have been carved out of wood. Something in the close-cropped black head was familiar to me, but I did not dare to let my imagination run astray. Suddenly he turned, and I caught my breath. It was Harry Rayburn. Harry Rayburn in the flesh. He rose and came over to me. Feeling better, he said a trifle awkwardly. I could not answer. The tears were running down my face. I was weak still, but I held his hand in both of mine. If only I could die like this, whilst he stood there looking clommy on me with that new look in his eyes. "Don't cry, Anne. Please don't cry. You're safe now. No one shall hurt you." He went and fetched a cup and brought it to me. "Drink some of this milk." I drank obediently. He went on talking in a low coaxing tone such as he might have used to a child. "Don't ask any more questions now. Go to sleep again. You'll be stronger by and by. I'll go away if you like." "No," I said urgently. "No, no. Then I'll stay." He brought a small stool over beside me and sat there. He laid his hand over mine, and, soothed and comforted, I dropped off to sleep once more. It must have been evening then, but when I woke again the sun was high in the heavens. I was alone in the hut, but as I stirred an old native woman came running in. She was hideous as sin, but she grinned at me encouragingly. She brought me water in a basin and helped me wash my face and hands. Then she brought me a large bowl of soup, and I finished it every drop. I asked her several questions, but she only grinned and nodded and chattered away in a guttural language, so I gathered she knew no English. Suddenly she stood up and drew back respectfully as Harry Rayburn entered. He gave her a nod of dismissal and she went out leaving us alone. He smiled at me. "Really better today?" "Yes, indeed, but very bewildered still." "Where am I?" "You're on a small island on the Zambesi about 4 miles up from the falls." Do my friends know I'm here?" He shook his head. "I must send word to them." "That is as you like of course, but if I were you I should wait until you are a little stronger." "Why?" He did not answer immediately, so I went on. "How long have I been here?" His answer amazed me. "Nearly a month." "Oh!" I cried. "I must send word to Suzanne." "Anxious? Who is Suzanne?" "She'll be terribly Mrs. Blair. I was with her and Sir Eustace and Colonel Race at the hotel, but you knew that surely." He shook his head. "I know nothing, except that I found you, caught in the fork of a tree, unconscious and with a badly wrenched arm." "Where was the tree?" "Overhanging the ravine. But for your clothes catching on the branches, you would infallibly have been dashed to pieces." I shuddered. Then a thought struck me. "You say you didn't know I was there. What about the note then?" "What note?" "The note you sent me, asking me to meet you in the clearing." He stared at me. "I sent no note." I felt myself flushing up to the roots of my hair. Fortunately he did not seem to notice. "How did you come to be on the spot in such a marvelous manner?" I asked in as nonchalant a manner as I could assume. "And what are you doing in this part of the world, anyway?" "I live here," he said simply. "On this island?" "Yes, I came here after the war. Sometimes I take parties from the hotel out in my boat, but it costs me very little to live, and mostly I do as I please." "You live here all alone?" "I am not pining for society, I assure you," he replied coldly. "I am sorry to have inflicted mine upon you," I retorted, but I seem to have had very little to say in the matter. To my surprise his eyes twinkled a little. "None whatever. I slung you across my shoulders like a sack of coal and carried you to my boat. Quite like a primitive man of the Stone Age." "But for a different reason," I put in. He flushed this time, a deep burning blush. The tan of his face was suffused. "But you haven't told me how you came to be wandering about so conveniently for me," I said hastily, to cover his confusion. "I couldn't sleep. I was restless, disturbed, had the feeling something was going to happen. In the end I took the boat and came ashore and tramped down towards the falls. I was just at the head of the Palm Gully when I heard you scream." "Why didn't you get help from the hotel instead of carting me all the way here?" I asked. He flushed again. "I suppose it seems an unpardonable liberty to you, but I don't think that even now you realize your danger. You think I should have informed your friends. Pretty friends, who allowed you to be decoyed out to death. No, I swore to myself that I'd take better care of you than anyone else could. Not a soul comes to this island. I got old Batany, Tom I cured of a fever once, to come and look after you. She's loyal. She'll never say a word. I could keep you here for months and no one would ever know. I could keep you here for months and no one would ever know. How some words please one. You did quite right, I said quietly. And I shall not send word to anyone. A day or so more anxiety doesn't make much difference. It's not as though they were my own people. They're only acquaintances really, even Suzanne. And whoever wrote that note must have known a great deal. It was not the work of an outsider. I managed to mention the note this time without blushing at all. If you would be guided by me, he said, hesitating. I don't expect I shall be, I answered candidly. But there's no harm in hearing. Do you always do what you like, Miss Bedingfeld? Usually, I replied cautiously. To anyone else I would have said always. I pity your husband, he said unexpectedly. You needn't, I retorted. I shouldn't dream of marrying anyone unless I was madly in love with them. And of course there is really nothing a woman enjoys so much as doing all the things she doesn't like for the sake of someone she does like. And the more self-willed she is, the more she likes it. I'm afraid I disagree with you. The boot is on the other leg as a rule. He spoke with a slight sneer. Exactly, I cried eagerly. And that's why there are so many unhappy marriages. It's all the fault of the men. Either they give way to their women and then the women despise them, or else they are utterly selfish, insist on their own way and never say thank you. Successful husbands make their wives do just what they want, and then make a frightful fuss of them for doing it. Women like to be mastered, but they hate not to have their sacrifices appreciated. On the other hand, men don't really appreciate women who are nice to them all the time. When I am married, I shall be a devil most of the time, but every now and then, when my husband least expects it, I shall show him what a perfect angel I can be. Harry laughed outright. What a cat and dog life you will lead. Lovers always fight, I assured him. Because they don't understand each other. And by the time they do understand each other they aren't in love anymore. Does the reverse hold true? Are people who fight each other always lovers? I don't know, I said, momentarily confused. He turned away to the fireplace. Like some more soup, he asked in a casual tone. Yes, please. I'm so hungry that I could eat a hippopotamus. That's good. He busied himself with the fire, I watched. When I can get off the couch, I'll cook for you, I promised. I don't suppose you know anything about cooking. I can warm up things out of tins as well as you can, I retorted, pointing to a row of tins on the mantelpiece. Touché, he said, and laughed. His whole face changed when he laughed. It became boyish, happy, a different personality. I enjoyed my soup. As I ate it I reminded him that he had not, after all, tendered me his advice. Ah, yes, what I was going to say was this. If I were you I would stay quietly perdu here until you are quite strong again. Your enemies will believe you dead. They will hardly be surprised at not finding the body. It would have been dashed to pieces on the rocks and carried down with the torrent. I shivered. Once you are completely restored to health, you can journey quietly on to Beira and get a boat to take you back to England. That would be very tame, I objected scornfully. There speaks a foolish schoolgirl. I'm not a foolish schoolgirl, I cried indignantly. I'm a woman. He looked at me with an expression I could not fathom as I sat up flushed and excited. God help me, so you are, he muttered, and went abruptly out. My recovery is rapid. The two injuries I had sustained were a knock on the head and a badly urine-shed arm. The latter was the most serious and, to begin with, my rescuer had believed it to be actually broken. A careful examination, however, convinced him that it was not so, and although it was very painful I was recovering the use of it quite quickly. It was a strange time. We were cut off from the world, alone together as Adam and Eve might have been, but with what a difference. Old Batany hovered about counting no more than a dog might have done. I insisted on doing the cooking, or as much of it as I could manage with one arm. Harry was out a good part of the time, but we spent long hours together lying out in the shade of the palms, talking and quarreling, discussing everything under high heaven, quarreling, and making it up again. We bickered a good deal, but there grew up between us a real and lasting comradeship such as I could never have believed possible. That and something else. The time was drawing near, I knew it, when I should be well enough to leave, and I realized it with a heavy heart. Was he going to let me go? Without a word? Without a sign? He had fits of silence, long moody intervals, moments when he would spring up and tramp off by himself. One evening the crisis came. We had finished our simple meal and were sitting in the doorway of the hut. The sun was sinking. Hairpins were necessities of life which Harry had not been able to provide me, and my hair, straight and black, hung to my knees. I sat, my chin on my hands, lost in meditation. I felt rather than saw Harry looking at me. "You look like a witch, Anne," he said at last, and there was something in his voice that had never been there before. He reached out his hand and just touched my hair. I shivered. Suddenly he sprang up with an oath. "You must leave here tomorrow, do you hear?" he cried. I can't bear any more. I'm only a man after all. You must go, Anne. You must. You're not a fool. You know yourself that this can't go on." "I suppose not," I said slowly. "But it's been happy, hasn't it?" "Happy? It's been hell. As bad as that. What do you torment me for? Why are you mocking at me? Why do you say that laughing into your hair?" "I wasn't laughing. And I'm not mocking. If you want me to go, I'll go. But if you want me to stay, I'll stay." "Not that," he cried vehemently. "Not that. Don't tempt me, Anne. Do you realize what I am? A criminal twice over. A man hunted down. They know me here as Harry Parker. They think I've been away on a trek up country, but any day they may put two and two together and then the blow will fall. You're so young, Anne, and so beautiful, with the kind of beauty that sends men mad. All the world's before you: love, life, everything. Mine's behind me, scorched, spoiled, with a taste of bitter ashes. If you don't want me, you know I want you. You know that I'd give my soul to pick you up in my arms and keep you here, hidden away from the world, forever and ever. And you're tempting me, Anne. You, with your long witch's hair, and your eyes that are golden and brune and green and never stop laughing even when your mouth is grave. But I'll save you from yourself and from me. You shall go tonight. You shall go to Barra." "I'm not going to Barra," I interrupted. "You are. You shall go to Barra if I have to take you there myself and throw you onto the boat. What do you think I'm made of? Do you think I'll you key up night after night, fearing they've got you? One can't go on counting on miracles happening. You must go back to England, Anne, and marry and be happy. With a steady man who'll give me a good home. Better that than utter disaster. And what of you?" His face grew grim and said, "I've got my work ready to hand. Don't ask what it is. You can guess, I dare say. But I'll tell you this: I'll clear my name, or die in the attempt, and I'll choke the life out of the damned scoundrel who did his best to murder you the other night." "We must be fair," I said. "He didn't actually push me over. He'd no need to. His plan was cleverer than that. I went up to the path afterwards. Everything looked all right, but by the marks on the ground I saw that the stones which outline the path had been taken up and put down again in a slightly different place. There are tall bushes growing just over the edge. He'd balanced the outside stones on them, so that you'd think you were still on the path and in reality you were stepping into nothingness. God help him if I lay my hands upon him." He paused a minute and then said in a totally different tone, "We've never spoken of these things, Anne, have we? But the time's come. I want you to hear the whole story from the beginning. If it hurts you to go over the past, don't tell me," I said in a low voice. "But I want you to know. I never thought I should speak of that part of my life to anyone. Funny, isn't it, the tricks fate plays?" He was silent for a minute or two. The sun had set, and the velvety darkness of the African night was enveloping us like a mantle. "Some of it I know," I said gently. "What do you know?" "I know that your real name is Harry Lucas." Still he hesitated, not looking at me, but staring straight out in front of him. I had no clue as to what was passing in his mind, but at last he jerked his head forward as though acquiescing in some unspoken decision of his own and began his story. Chapter XXVI. You are right. My real name is Harry Lucas. My father was a retired soldier who came out to farm in Rhodesia. He died when I was in my second year at Cambridge. Were you fond of him? I asked suddenly. I clanty no. Then he flushed and went on with sudden vehemence, why do I say that? I did love my father. We said bitter things to each other the last time I saw him, and we had many rows over my wildness and my debts, but I cared for the old man. I know how much now, and it's too late, he continued more quietly. It was at Cambridge that I met the other fellow young Eardsley. Yes, young Eardsley. His father, as you know, was one of South Africa's most prominent men. We drifted together at once, my friend and I. We had our love of South Africa in common, and we both had a taste for the untrodden places of the world. After he left Cambridge, Eardsley had a final quarrel with his father. The old man had paid his debts twice, he refused to do so again. There was a bitter scene between them. Sir Lawrence declared himself at the end of his patience. He would do no more for his son. He must stand on his legs for a while. The result was, as you know, that those two young men went off to South America together, prospecting for diamonds. I'm not going into that now, but we had a wonderful time out there. Hardships in plenty, you understand, but it was a good life, a hand-to-mouth scramble for existence far from the beaten track, and, my God, that's the place to know a friend. There was a bond forged between us two out there that only death could have broken. Well, as Colonel Race told you, our efforts were crowned with success. We found a second Kimberley in the heart of the British Guiana jungles. I can't tell you our elation. It wasn't so much the actual value in money of the find. You see, Eardsley was used to money, and he knew that when his father died he would be a millionaire, and Lucas had always been poor and was used to it. No, it was the sheer delight of discovery. He paused, and then added, almost apologetically, you don't mind my telling it this way, do you? As though I wasn't in it at all. It seems like that now when I look back and see those two boys. I almost forget that one of them was Harry Rayburn. Tell it any way you like, I said, and he went on, we came to Kimberley very cock-a-hoop over our find. We brought a magnificent selection of diamonds with us to submit to the experts. And then in the hotel at Kimberley we met her. I stiffened a little, and the hand that rested on the doorpost clenched itself involuntarily. Anita Grunberg, that was her name. She was an actress. Quite young and very beautiful. She was South African born, but her mother was a Hungarian, I believe. There was some sort of mystery about her, and that, of course, heightened her attraction for two boys home from the wilds. She must have had an easy task. We both fell for her right away, and we both took it hard. It was the first shadow that had ever come between us, but even then it didn't weaken our friendship. Each of us, I honestly believe, was willing to stand aside for the other to go in and win. But that wasn't her game. Sometimes, afterwards, I wondered why it hadn't been, for Sir Lawrence Eardsley's only son was quite a party. But the truth of it is that she was married to a sorter in De Beers, though nobody knew of it. She pretended enormous interests in our discovery, and we told her all about it and even showed her the diamonds. Delilah, that's had she should have been called, and she played her part well. The De Beers robbery was discovered, and like a thunderclap the police came clommy upon us. They seized our diamonds. We only laughed at first, the whole thing was so absurd. And then the diamonds were produced in court, and without question they were the stones stolen from De Beers. Anita Grunberg had disappeared. She had effected the substitution neatly enough, and our story that these were not the stones originally in our possession was laughed to scorn. Sir Lawrence Eardsley had enormous influence. He succeeded in getting the case dismissed, but it left two young men ruined and disgraced to face the world with the stigma of thief attached to their names, and it pretty well broke the old fellow's heart. He had one bitter interview with his son in which he heaped upon him every reproach imaginable. He had done what he could to save the family name, but from that day on his son was his son no longer. He cast him off utterly. And the boy, like the proud young fool that he was, remained silent, disdaining to protest his innocence in the face of his father's disbelief. He came out furious from the interview his friend was waiting for him. A week later war was declared. The two friends enlisted together. You know what happened. The best pal a man ever had was killed, partly through his mad recklessness in rushing into unnecessary danger. He died with his name tarnished. I swear to you, Anne, that it was mainly on his account that I was so bitter against that woman. It had gone deeper with him than with me. I had been madly in love with her for the moment. I even think that I frightened her sometimes, but with him it was a quieter and deeper feeling. She had been the very center of his universe, and her betrayal of him tore up the very roots of life. The blow stunned him and left him paralyzed. Harry paused. After a minute or two he went on, as you know, I was reported missing, presumed killed. I never troubled to correct the mistake. I took the name of Parker and came to this island, which I knew of old. At the beginning of the war, I had had ambitious hopes of proving my innocence, but now all that spirit seemed dead. All I felt was, what's the good? My pal was dead, neither he nor he had any living relations who would care. I was supposed to be dead too, let it remain at that. I led a peaceful existence here, neither happy nor unhappy, numbed of all feeling. I see now, though I did not realize it at the time, that was partly the effect of the war. And then one day something occurred to wake me right up again. I was taking a party of people in my boat on a trip up the river, and I was standing at the landing stage, helping them in, when one of the men uttered a startled exclamation. It focused my attention on him. He was a small, thin man with a beard, and he is staring at me for all he was worth as though I was a ghost. So powerful is his emotion that it awakened my curiosity. I made inquiries about him at the hotel and learned that his name was Carton, that he came from Kimberley, and that he was a diamond sorter employed by De Beers. In a minute all the old sense of wrong surged over me again. I left the island and went to Kimberley. I could find out little more about him, however. In the end, I decided that I must force an interview. I took my revolver with me. In the brief glimpse I had had of him, I had realized that he was a physical coward. No sooner were we face to face than I recognized that he was afraid of me. I soon forced him to tell me all he knew. He had engineered part of the robbery and Anita Grunberg was his wife. He had once caught sight of both of us when we were dining with her at the hotel, and, having read that I was killed, my appearance in the flesh at the falls had startled him badly. He and Anita had married quite young, but she had soon drifted away from him. She had got in with a bad lot, he told me, and it was then for the first time that I heard of the Colonel. Carton himself had never been mixed up in anything except this one affair, so he solemnly assured me, and I was inclined to believe him. He was emphatically not of the stuff of which successful criminals are made. I still had the feeling that he was keeping back something. As a test, I threatened to shoot him there and then, declaring that I cared very little what became of me now. In a frenzy of terror he poured out a further story. It seems that Anita Grunberg did not quite trust the Colonel. Whilst pretending to hand over to him the stones she had taken from the hotel, she kept back some in her own possession. Carton advised her, with his technical knowledge, which to keep. If, at any time, these stones were produced, they were of such color and quality as to be readily identifiable, and the experts at De Beers would admit at once that these stones had never passed through their hands. In this way my story of a substitution would be supported, my name would be cleared, and suspicion would be diverted to the proper quarter. I gathered that, contrary to his usual practice, the Colonel himself had been concerned in this affair, therefore Anita felt satisfied that she had a real hold over him, should she need it. Carton now proposed that I should make a bargain with Anita Grunberg, or Nadina, as she now called herself. For a sufficient sum of money he thought that she would be willing to give up the diamonds and betray her former employer. He would cable to her immediately. I was still suspicious of Carton. He was a man whom it was easy enough to frighten, but who, in his fright, would tell so many lies that to sift the truth out from them would be no easy job. I went back to the hotel and waited. By the following evening I judged that he would have received the reply to his cable. I called round at his house and was told that Mr. Carton was away, but would be returning on the morrow. Instantly I became suspicious. In the nick of time I found out that he was in reality sailing for England on the Kilmorden Castle, which left Cape Town in 2 days' time. I had just time to journey Clomie and catch the same boat. I had no intention of alarming Carton by revealing my presence on board. I had done a good deal of acting in my time at Cambridge, and it was comparatively easy for me to transform myself into a grave bearded gentleman of middle age. I avoided Carton carefully on board the boat, keeping to my own cabin as far as possible under the pretense of illness. I had no difficulty in trailing him, and we got to London. He went straight to an hotel and did not go out until the following day. He left the hotel shortly before 1 o'clock. I was behind him. He went straight to a house agent in Knightsbridge. There he asked for particulars of houses to let on the river. Was at the next table also inquiring about houses. Then suddenly in walked Anita Grunberg, Nadina, whatever you like to call her. Superb, insolent, and almost as beautiful as ever. God! How I hated her! There she was, the woman who had ruined my life and who had also ruined a better life than mine. At that minute I could have put my hands round her neck and squeezed the life out of her inch by inch. Just for a minute or two I saw red. I hardly took in what the agent is saying. It was her voice that I heard next, high and clear, with an exaggerated foreign accent. The Mill House, Marlow. The property of Sir Eustace Pedlar. That sounds as though it might suit me. At any rate, I will go and see it. The man wrote her an order, and she walked out again in her regal insolent manner. Not by word or a sign had she recognized Carton, yet I was sure that their meeting there was a preconceived plan. Then I started to jump to conclusions. Not knowing that Sir Eustace was at Caen, I thought that this house hunting business was a mere pretext for meeting him in the Mill House. I knew that he had been in South Africa at the time of the robbery, and never having seen him I immediately leaped to the conclusion that he himself was the mysterious colonel of whom I had heard so much. I followed my two suspects along Knightsbridge. Nadina went into the Hyde Park Hotel. I quickened my pace and went in also. She walked straight into the restaurant, and I decided that I would not risk her recognizing me at the moment, but would continue to follow Carton. I was in great hopes that he was going to get the diamonds, and that by suddenly appearing and making myself known to him when he least expected it I might startle the truth out of him. I followed him down into the tube station at Hyde Park Corner. He is standing by himself at the end of the platform. There was some girl standing near, but no one else. I decided that I would accost him then and there. You know what happened. In the sudden shock of seeing a man whom he imagined far away in South Africa, he lost his head and stepped back upon the line. He was always a coward. Under the pretext of being a doctor, I managed to search his pockets. There was a wallet with some notes in it and 1 or 2 unimportant letters. There is a roll of films which I must have dropped somewhere later, and there was a piece of paper with an appointment made on it for the 22nd on the Kilmorden Castle. In my haste to get away before anyone detained me, I dropped that also, but fortunately I remembered the figures. I hurried to the nearest cloakroom and hastily removed my makeup. I did not want to be laid by the heels for picking a dead man's pocket. Then I retraced my steps to the Hyde Park Hotel. Nadina was still having lunch. I needn't describe in detail how I followed her down to Marlow. She went into the house, and I spoke to the woman at the lodge, pretending that I was with her. Then I, too, went in. He stopped. There was a tense silence. You will believe me, Anne, won't you? I swear before God that what I am going to say is true. I went into the house after her with something very like murder in my heart, and she is dead. I found her in that first-floor room. God! It was horrible. Dead, and I was not more than 3 minutes behind her. And there was no sign of anyone else in the house. Of course I realized at once the terrible position I was in. By one master stroke the blackmailed had rid himself of the blackmailer, and at the same time had provided a victim to whom the crime would be ascribed. The hand of the colonel was very plain. For the second time I was to be his victim. Fool that I had been to walk into the trap so easily. I hardly know how I did next. I managed to go out of the place looking fairly normal, but I knew that it could not be long before the crime was discovered and a description of my appearance telegraphed all over the country. I lay low for some days, not daring to make a move. In the end chance came to my aid. I overheard a conversation between two middle-aged gentlemen in the street, one of whom proved to be Sir Eustace Pedlar. I at once conceived the idea of attaching myself to him as his secretary. The fragment of conversation I had overheard gave me my clue. I was now no longer so sure that Sir Eustace Pedlar was the colonel. His house might have been appointed as a rendezvous by accident, or for some obscure motive that I had not fathomed. "Do you know," I interrupted, "that Guy Paget was in Marlow at the date of the murder?" "That settles it then. I thought he was at Caen with Sir Eustace. He was supposed to be in Florence, but he certainly never went there. I'm pretty certain he was really in Marlow, but of course I can't prove it. And to think I never suspected Paget for a minute until the night he tried to throw you overboard. The man's a marvelous actor." "Yes, isn't he? That explains why the mill house was chosen. Paget could probably get in and out of it unobserved. Of course he made no objection to my accompanying Sir Eustace across in the boat. He didn't urine me laid by the heels immediately. You see, evidently Nadina didn't bring the jewels with her to the rendezvous as they had counted on her doing. I fancy that Carton really had them and concealed them somewhere on the Kilmorden Castle. That's where he came in. They hoped that I might have some clue as to where they were hidden. As long as the colonel did not recover the diamonds, he was still in danger, hence his anxiety to get them at all costs. Where the devil Carton hid them, if he did hide them, I don't know." "That's another story," I quoted. "My story. And I'm going to tell it you now." Chapter XXVII. Harry listened attentively whilst I recounted all the events that I have narrated in these pages. The thing that bewildered and astonished him most was to find that all along the diamonds had been in my possession, or rather in Suzanne's. That was a fact he had never suspected. Of course, after hearing his story, I realized the point of Carton's little arrangement, or rather Nadina's, since I had no doubt that it was her brain which had conceived the plan. No surprise tactics executed against her or her husband could result in the seizure of the diamonds. The secret was locked in her own brain, and the colonel was not likely to guess that they had been entrusted to the keeping of an ocean steward. Harry's vindication from the old charge of theft seemed assured. It was the other, graver charge that paralyzed all our activities. For, as things stood, he could not come out in the open to prove his case. The one thing we came back to, again and again, was the identity of the colonel. Was he, or was he not, Guy Paget? "I should say he was, but for one thing," said Harry. "It seems pretty much of a certainty that it was Paget who murdered Anita Grunberg at Marlow, and that certainly lends color to the supposition that he is actually the colonel, since Anita's business is not of the nature to be discussed with a subordinate. No, the only thing that militates against that theory is the attempt to put you out of the way on the night of your arrival here. You saw Paget left behind at Cape Town. By no possible means could he have arrived here before the following Wednesday. He is unlikely to have any emissaries in this part of the world, and all his plans were laid to deal with you in Cape Town. He might, of course, have cabled instructions to some lieutenant of his in Johannesburg, who could have joined the Rhodesian train at Mafeking, but his instructions would have had to be particularly definite to allow of that note being written." We sat silent for a moment, then Harry went on slowly, "You say that Mrs. Blair was asleep when you left the hotel, and that you heard Sir Eustace dictating to Miss Pettigrew. Where was Colonel Race?" "I could not find him anywhere." "Had he any reason to believe that you and I might be friendly with each other?" "He might have had," I answered thoughtfully, remembering our conversation on the way back from the Matopos. "He's a very powerful personality," I continued, "but not at all my idea of the colonel. And, anyway, such an idea would be absurd. He's in the Secret Service." "How do we know that he is?" It's the easiest thing in the world to throw out a hint of that kind. No one contradicts it, and the rumor spreads until everyone believes it as gospel truth. It provides an excuse for all sorts of doubtful doings. Anne, do you like race? I do and I don't. He repels me and at the same time fascinates me, but I know one thing, I'm always a little afraid of him. He was in South Africa, you know, at the time of the Kimberley robbery, said Harry slowly. But it was he who told Suzanne all about the Colonel and how he had been in Paris trying to get on his track. Camouflage of a particularly clever kind. But where does Paget come in? Is he in Race's pay? Perhaps, said Harry slowly, he doesn't come in at all. What? Think back, Anne. Did you ever hear Paget's own account of that night on the Kilmorden? Yes, through Sir Eustace. I repeated it. Harry listened closely. He saw a man coming from the direction of Sir Eustace's cabin and followed him up on deck. Is that what he says? Now, who had the cabin opposite to Sir Eustace? Colonel Race. Supposing Colonel Race crept up on deck, and, foiled in his attack on you, fled round the deck and met Paget just coming through the saloon door. He knocks him down and springs inside, closing the door. We dash round and find Paget lying there. How's that? You forget that he declares positively it was you who knocked him down. Well, suppose that just as he regains consciousness he sees me disappearing in the distance. Wouldn't he take it for granted that I was his assailant? Especially as he thought all along it was I he was following. It's possible, yes, I said slowly. But it alters all our ideas. And there are other things. Most of them are open to explanation. The man who followed you in Cape Town spoke to Paget, and Paget looked at his watch. The man might have merely asked him the time. It was just a coincidence, you mean? Not exactly. There's a method in all this, connecting Paget with the affair. Why was the mill house chosen for the murder? Was it because Paget had been in Kimberley when the diamonds were stolen? Would he have been made the scapegoat if I had not appeared so providentially upon the scene? Then you think he may be entirely innocent. It looks like it, but, if so, we've got to find out what he is doing in Marlow. If he's got a reasonable explanation of that, we're on the right tack. He got up. It's past midnight. Turn in, Anne, and get some sleep. Just before dawn I'll take you over in the boat. You must catch the train at Livingstone. I've got a friend there who will keep you hidden away until the train starts. You go to Bulawayo and catch the Beira train there. I can find out from my friend in Livingstone what's gone on at the hotel and where your friends are now. Beira, I said meditatively. Yes, Anne, it's Beira for you. This is man's work. Leave it to me. We had had a momentary respite from emotion whilst we talked the situation out, but it was on us again now. We did not even look at each other. Very well, I said, and passed into the hut. I lay down on the skin-covered couch, but I didn't sleep, and outside I could hear Harry Rayburn pacing up and down through the long dark hours. At last he called me, "Come, Anne, it's time to go." I got up and came out obediently. It was still quite dark, but I knew that dawn was not far off. "We'll take the canoe, not the motorboat." Suddenly he stopped dead and held up his hand. "Hush! What's that?" Harry began, when I listened, but could hear nothing. His ears were sharper than mine, however, the ears of a man who has lived long in the wilderness. Presently I heard it too, the faint splash of paddles in the water coming from the direction of the right bank of the river and rapidly approaching our little landing stage. We strained our eyes in the darkness, and could make out a dark blur on the surface of the water. It was a boat. Then there was a momentary spurt of flame. Someone had struck a match. By its light I recognized one figure, the red-bearded Uchman of the villa at New Eisenberg. The others were natives. "Quick, back to the hut." Harry swept me back with him. He took down a couple of rifles and a revolver from the wall. "Can you load a rifle?" "I never have." "Show me how." I grasped his instructions well enough. We closed the door and Harry stood by the window which overlooked the landing stage. The boat was just about to run alongside it. "Who's that?" called out Harry in a ringing voice. Any doubt we might have had as to our visitor's intentions was swiftly resolved. A hail of bullets splattered round us. Fortunately neither of us was hit. Harry raised the rifle. It spat murderously, and again, and again. I heard 2 groans and a splash. "That's given em something to think about," he muttered grimly, as he reached for the second rifle. "Stand well back, Anne, for God's sake. And load quickly." More bullets. One just grazed Harry's cheek. His answering fire was more deadly than theirs. I had the rifle reloaded when he turned for it. He caught me close with his left arm and kissed me once savagely before he turned to the window again. Suddenly he uttered a shout. "They're going had enough of it. They're a good mark out there on the water, and they can't see how many of us there are. They're rooted for the moment, but they'll come back. We'll have to get ready for them." He flung down the rifle and turned to me. "Anne. You beauty. You wonder. You little queen. As brave as a lion. Black-haired witch." He caught me in his arms. He kissed my hair, my eyes, my mouth. "And now to business," he said, suddenly releasing me. "Get out those tins of paraffin." I did as I was told. He was busy inside the hut. Presently I saw him on the roof of the hut, crawling along with something in his arms. He rejoined me in a minute or two. "Go down to the boat. We'll have to carry it across the island to the other side." He picked up the paraffin as I disappeared. "They're coming back," I called softly. I had seen the blur moving out from the opposite shore. He ran down to me. Just in time. "Why, where the hell's the boat?" Both had been cut adrift. Harry whistled softly. "We're in a tight place, honey. Mind. Not with you. Ah, but dying together's not much fun. We'll do better than that. See, they've got 2 boatloads this time. Going to land at 2 different points. Now for my little scenic effect." Almost as he spoke a long flame shot up from the hut. Its light illuminated 2 crouching figures huddled together on the roof. My old clothes stuffed with rags, but they won't tumble to it for some time. "Come, Anne, we've got to try desperate means." Hand in hand, we raced across the island. Only a narrow channel of water divided it from the shore on that side. "We've got to swim for it." "Can you swim at all, Anne?" "Not that it matters. I can get you across. It's the side for a boat too many rocks, but the right side for swimming, and the right side for Livingstone. I can swim a little farther than that." "What's the danger, Harry?" For I had seen the grim look on his face. "Sharks." "No, you little goose. Sharks live in the sea. But you're sharp, Anne." "Crocs, that's the trouble." "Crocodiles." "Yes, don't think of them or say your prayers, whichever you feel inclined." We plunged in. My prayers must have been efficacious, for we reached the shore without adventure, and drew ourselves up wet and dripping on the bank. Now for Livingstone. It's rough going, I'm afraid, and wet clothes won't make it any better. But it's got to be done. That walk was a nightmare. My wet skirts flapped round my legs, and my stockings were soon torn off by the thorns. Finally I stopped, utterly exhausted. Harry came back to me. "Hold up, honey. I'll carry you for a bit." That was the way I came into Livingstone, slung across his shoulder like a sack of coals. How he did it for all that way, I don't know. The first faint light of dawn was just breaking. Harry's friend is a young man of 20-odd who kept a store of native curios. His name was Ned. Perhaps he had another, but I never heard it. He didn't seem in the least surprised to see Harry walk in, dripping wet, holding an equally dripping female by the hand. Men are very wonderful. He gave us food to eat, and hot coffee, and got our clothes dried for us whilst we rolled ourselves in Manchester blankets of gaudy hue. In the tiny back room of the hut we were safe from observation whilst he departed to make judicious inquiries as to what had become of Sir Eustace's party, and whether any of them were still at the hotel. It is then that I informed Harry that nothing would induce me to go to Barra. I never meant to, anyway, but now all reason for such proceedings had vanished. The point of the plan had been that my enemies believed me dead. Now that they knew I wasn't dead, my going to Barrow would do no good whatever. They could easily follow me there and murder me quietly. I should have no one to protect me. It was finally arranged that I should join Suzanne, wherever she was, and devote all my energies to taking care of myself. On no account was I to seek adventures or endeavor to checkmate the Colonel. I was to remain quietly with her and await instructions from Harry. The diamonds were to be deposited in the bank at Kimberley under the name of Parker. "There's one thing," I said thoughtfully, "we ought to have a code of some kind. We don't want to be hoodwinked again by messages purporting to come from one to the other. That's easy enough. Any message that comes genuinely from me will have the word 'and' crossed out in it. Without trademark, none genuine," I murmured. "What about wires?" "Any wires from me will be signed Andy." "Train will be in before long, Harry," said Ned, putting his head in and withdrawing it immediately. I stood up. "And shall I marry a nice steady man if I find one?" I asked demurely. Harry came close to me. "My God! Anne, if you ever marry anyone else but me, I'll ting his neck." "And as for you yes," I said, pleasurably excited. "I shall carry you away and beat you black and blue." "What a delightful husband I have chosen," I said satirically. "Doesn't he change his mind overnight?" Nchapterxxvii, extract from the cherry of S.W. Eustace Pedler. As I remarked once before, I am essentially a man of peace. I yearn for a quiet life, and that's just the one thing I don't seem able to have. I am always in the middle of storms and alarms. The relief of getting away from Paget with his incessant nosing out of intrigues was enormous, and Miss Pettigrew is certainly a useful creature. Although there is nothing of the hoorie about her, one or two of her accomplishments are invaluable. It is true that I had a touch of liver at Bulawayo and behaved like a bear in consequence, but I had had a disturbed night in the train. At 3 a.m. an exquisitely dressed young man looking like a musical comedy hero of the Wild West entered my compartment and asked where I was going. Disregarding my first murmur of "tea and for God's sake don't put sugar in it," he repeated his question, laying stress on the fact that he was not a waiter but an immigration officer. I finally succeeded in satisfying him that I was suffering from no infectious disease, that I was visiting Rhodesia from the purest of motives, and further gratified him with my full Christian names and my place of birth. I then endeavored to snatch a little sleep, but some officious ass aroused me at 5.30 with a cup of liquid sugar which he called tea. I don't think I threw it at him, but I know that that was what I yearned to do. He brought me unsugared tea, stone cold, at 6, and I then fell asleep utterly exhausted, to awaken just outside Bulawayo and be landed with a beastly wooden giraffe, all legs and neck. But for these small contretemps, all had been going smoothly. And then fresh calamity befell. It was the night of our arrival at the falls. I was dictating to Miss Pettigrew in my sitting room, when suddenly Mrs. Blair burst in without a word of excuse and wearing most compromising attire. "Where's Anne?" she cried. "A nice question to ask. As though I were responsible for the girl. What did she expect Miss Pettigrew to think? That I was in the habit of producing Anne Bedingfeld from my pocket at midnight or thereabouts. Very compromising for a man in my position. I presume," I said coldly, "that she is in her bed." I cleared my throat and glanced at Miss Pettigrew, to show that I was ready to resume dictating. I hoped Mrs. Blair would take the hint. She did nothing of the kind. Instead she sank into a chair and waved a slippered foot in an agitated manner. "She's not in her room. I've been there. I had a terrible dream that she was in some awful danger, and I got up and went to her room, just to reassure myself, you know. She wasn't there and her bed hadn't been slept in." She looked at me appealingly. "What shall I do, Sir Eustace?" Repressing the desire to reply, "Go to bed, and don't worry over nothing. An able-bodied young woman like Anne Bedingfeld is perfectly well able to take care of herself," I proved judicially. "What does Race say about it? Why should Race have it all his own way? Let him have some of the disadvantages as well as the advantages of female society. I can't find him anywhere. She was evidently making a night of it. I sighed and sat Clomie in a chair. I don't quite see the reason for your agitation, I said patiently. My dream that curry we had for dinner.